Hello, everyone. Thank you for visiting my channel, Educational Norm. I work as an educational consultant, which means that I have the opportunity to interact and visit with many teachers across Ohio and beyond. Those interactions have driven me to tell their stories and their ideas on education. The goal of Educational Norm is to provide an informational network that focuses on positive aspects of education, the people preparing students for the future of our world. Join us each week for a new interview, and please subscribe and share the channel with others that you think may enjoy the program. Thank you and enjoy the show. Hello, everyone. Today we have Amanda Price, who is currently a high school ELA teacher in Independence, Ohio at Independence High School. I had the good fortune of crossing paths with Amanda when I was offering PD at independent schools. And what I found was a person that is a teacher that sees the big picture, is motivated and willing to take calculated risks to make difference for her students. And Amanda uses inquiry-based instruction to reach all of her children. She has a master's in K-12 educational leadership and a strong understanding of curriculum. Amanda, welcome to the show.
Hi, you are so nice. I feel so honored. And now
Didn't
I
you
have
tell me
terrible
what to say?
imposter syndrome.
No, no imposter syndrome. It's great having you here, and I feel lucky to have crossed paths with you when I was out there and got to know a little bit about you and see your passion for teaching and kids in general. So I was happy to have you as a guest. I was so happy you agreed to this.
Oh no, it was a pleasure. Well, I like listening to what you were talking about. And I think that what you were showing us was how to connect that real world into like what we're doing into our classrooms to make everything relevant. So you can't help but listen to that.
Well, thank you. And I do really enjoy that aspect. And I think that the more that I'm out in this role as a consultant, I see more and more schools trying to do that. So I'm happy that you got to see it. And we got to Independence has 800 businesses in that little municipality. It's crazy.
Oh yeah, no, it is. It's nuts. And I can't, we're a little bit of a standstill right now because we've had some structural changes with whatnot, but I know that we will end up having to reach out to these businesses and the community is so tight knit. It's gonna happen. And it's gonna happen because it has to happen. I mean, that's all part of, keeping the kids involved and the way with at the rate that technology is changing, at the rate that kids are needing to be incentivized to learn. Well, what better way to incentivize them than bringing them to the adult table and allowing them to see where they're headed?
That is a great way
Backwards
of putting
design.
it. Right, exactly. So let's get it started by finding out a little bit about you. I just learned a few things myself about you that I did not know. So share with us your journey to get where you're at now.
Um, so what you learned was that this was my career switch. So I didn't start teaching at 22. I started teaching when I think I was 26. And I wanted to always be a teacher, but it took me a while to get to that point. When I was in college in Florida, I was a great student. I was always a good student, but I guess like I was telling you, I got distracted by the beach and I was like, okay, well, this is not a good place for me to go to college. So I came back up to Ohio to try to re-engage myself in my education. And I had the good pleasure of just being able to shadow one of my favorite teachers that I had had a few years back before I graduated. And I told her I want to be an educator. She's like, you'd be great. You'd be a great English teacher. And I go in every Friday for 9 weeks just to see class, just to be there to assist. And I realized probably by like week three, around high schoolers at the age of 19, that this was not 18, 19, this was not at all what I thought it would be. I always thought of teaching as like a work of art. You get to take something you love and you get to create something beautiful with it and the strategies that you implement. And every teacher's different. And I can't wait to try to do that. And then I saw it from a different perspective as not a student. It's just like an outside, observer. And I realized very quickly that it's so much more than that. And I saw too that I was not mature enough to be working with high schoolers because when you're laughing at their jokes you're going to lose all classroom management, and you can see pretty quickly as an outside observer classroom management is key. um and so I stepped back. I was like, I don't think I can do this. I just don't feel like I would be the right person for this, and I left. Well, one thing that I had done most of my teenage life was work in restaurants. And by 19, I had started bartending in Michigan when I just moved up there with some friends just to continue to try to see the world. Um, And I found through that career, I know that sounds really silly. People hear like restaurants and you're like, oh, he worked in a restaurant. Congratulations. If you've never worked in one, you have no idea what it's like. And I think one of the reasons why I have very successful days with kids. It's a really stressful business. And I started Bob Evans when I was 15, hostessing. And I ended my career at the age of 27, working for a fine dining establishment, a reputable one in Cleveland, with two other bartenders who were twice my age. I was the youngest one. Um, and prior to working there, I was working at another high-end one, moving my way into corporate. Because prior to that, I was a lead bartender. I was a head bartender for one of their stores, training other bartenders, training other servers how to do this job. And when we talk about training, like first of all, these are people who are also older than me that I'm trying to educate and instruct. And we're talking about I'm instructing things on like how to handle pressure. What do you do when you get six tables set at the same time and the bar is backed up and chef is upset because they got the orders wrong in the shipment coming in, and now you were supposed to have this special and there's only four when everybody thought that there were 12, and now you've got tables matting. These are tables with lots of money and this is a very, very reputable restaurant, and guess who they're going to yell at
Right.
when it goes wrong, right? So it's a highly, highly stressful position. We call it being in the weeds. Like you're just constantly in the weeds when you work in restaurants. And I loved it. I actually thrived in those moments. Um, and I remember looking at social media one night and I was 24, 23, 22, something around that time. And I saw my friends graduating from college going into teaching and I was jealous. I was like, I could do this. Like I was a great student. I got great grades. I focused. I'm organized, and I'd gotten better. And so I did. I still bartended. It was great. Made a lot of money. Took a pay cut to be a teacher. In case you don't know that, like that's how good that job can be sometimes.
Wow.
But when I got to teaching, I was so pleasantly surprised at the parallels between the two. And I think it made me a better teacher because of it. And I would go into these interviews with these districts and I'd explain my story just like I did to you, and I know that that's what assisted in getting me hired. They wanted somebody who could bring that real world experience in with teenagers, somebody who was comfortable talking to people um, in a way that didn't make them feel belittled, because I was talking to people older than me, and so I can talk to a teenager so that they're not feeling like a small child. Um, and I don't know, I think, and then also just letting them know, hey guys, I know what it looks like on the outside. This
Right.
is what it's like, and I think this is what's going to help you.
Well,
So,
I think that's where I saw your bigger picture thoughts. When we were visiting some of the businesses, you were talking to the owners and the HR people, the people that we had a chance to interact with, and you were saying we need to get kids out here because they need to see this. And you were finding ways to tie it into your curriculum. You were finding ways to bring it into the kids' lives that were different than what traditional education is. So what have you brought in to your teaching right now that you attribute directly back to your bartending and restaurant days?
um, that's a big question. So I'll admit, like, it can be difficult sometimes trying to take an English curriculum and tying it into something as concrete as, working in a restaurant, aside from like maybe more obvious ideas, like create a menu and pair with these people. That's a lot of, like, when you zoom out and you look at at everything that would need to take place to do something like that, that's a lot of moving parts and parts that I don't always have. I think what I try to do to help my kids see the real world, even when we're in the classroom, to bring that perspective here to show them what's going on is I emphasize these soft skills, the soft skills that you need to be successful. And we look at different concepts sometimes, or how do I want to explain this?
Sorry, I
So
didn't
I
mean
got
to
to
put you
think
on the
about this
spot
because
there.
I can't take them anywhere. And yeah, I would love to have my kids get published in a book. Like that's one of the things that I've been trying to figure out how to do. It's very difficult. um, uh, but I guess the way that I do it is, I guess it's more low key. It's light. but they like it. We do Socratic seminars, and my kids work year round towards these things, based on how I structure my units. My units are always structured around big philosophical questions just to help them see the relevancy behind what we're doing in class. So 10th grade, our essential question that we try to answer for the entire year is, what does it mean to be human? What does that mean? And I have the kids answer it right off the rip before I teach anything. And then we get into the first unit, and the first unit is centered around, why do we tell stories? And we look at, and it's great because you embed your standards in, which are incredibly important. We never want to lose sight of the standards, of the skills that our kids actually do need to learn, because they have to still take that ACT. They still have to take that SAT. And we are still, of course, trying to make sure that we know what we're teaching without losing sight of what we're teaching. But our goal is to take those skills and put them into what matters. So I want to show my kids how you can use these skills and what matters. So we ask these questions, what is it, why do we tell stories? And in that you can learn all about plots, you can character development, how characters move plots, and how things can be born from that. Right now we're looking at dystopian literature, and the question is, can cautionary tales alter human behavior? And then we look at everything from, you know, back when Vonnegut was writing and Bradbury was writing, all the way up to now. And we're watching a documentary called The Social Dilemma on Netflix that was released in 2020, or we're reading a short story that was written in 2019. And so we take these skills, we take these thoughts. My kids are learning all about the standards. They're simultaneously learning the skills, preparing for a state test, preparing for ACTs and SATs, but we're taking these big questions and I'm asking them in classes. And I'm allowing, as I tell the kids, I'm allowing you a seat at the table where you probably have been waiting to take a seat. And they find ways. If you just let kids talk, you ask questions that are broad enough like that, and you let kids talk, and the only parameters you give them is, hey, by the way, if you're going to use evidence, could you just use the evidence from what we're learning in class?
Right. That'd
I
be nice.
strategically chose that. And you let them talk. Um, I've always been so just like blown away by what they know and what they connect. And you hear these engaged conversations. You hear kids leveling up. They're learning words that they've never heard before. They're using them. They're using them correctly. They're learning how to discuss with each other. They're learning how to hear a question and how to break it down and answer it. These are all skills you need in the real world. You have to be able to answer that interview question. And guess what? You just did it in the Socratic seminar. You have to be able to cite evidence. You have to be able to explain why this is happening here. And then these are their basic life skills. Would I love to go further? Yes.
Well, and I know you do, but I also I knew that question might be difficult because you do so many good things within your classroom that you don't even feel like those things stand out, but those things do stand out to kids. They're probably excited to have their voice heard. They're probably excited to be able to talk with their neighbors about something other than, the typical lunchroom talk. So those opportunities to be intellectual and to share ideas that are not typical is a great way to start preparing them for life in general.
Oh, absolutely. And I think too, when we talk about like student agency, right? Or just having some kind of voice in how you're learning. So my kids, my 11th graders surprised me actually, right? So I like doing these different immersive activities, and I'll let things get crazy because I think that sometimes, and I fall into this trap. I fall into the trap that kids need a circus to stay engaged, right? No, they don't. They don't. What you need to do is listen. Just listen to them.
Mhm.
And this is the best thing. I can't take my kids out down Rockside Road, and I don't have something set up with a partner where we could be in a building working alongside an HR company. I don't have that, but I can listen to them. And we're reading Hamlet right now. We're reading and watching Hamlet. And I wanted to do oh my gosh, character interviews. Because we're learning interpretation. This is a skill. I'm like, well, have fun, guys. This will be great. And don't ask me how I related it to real life. I might have I might have struggled for a minute. But this is where they related it to real life. They're like, can we just talk about what happened though? Like, I'm struggling with this one a little bit. Can we just talk about it? And I said, yeah. I stepped back and I'm like, okay, seventh period might have loved the character interviews, and they did. Oh my gosh, it got crazy, but they were still focused and great notes were taken. Eighth period's personality isn't that way. that's not how they function. That's not the ingredients of that classroom. And it's my job as the teacher to listen to that. And it's my job to also create an atmosphere where they feel comfortable asking to change things. And in fact, they should be able to ask to change things because I want them to be reflecting on how they're learning. Are you learning?
That example to me is great because the flexibility to be able to switch modes from literally one classroom to the next, one period to the next, and approach it in a totally different way because of the needs of the students is spot on in your idea of listening to kids. That's awesome.
Well, and not only that, if you're able to listen to kids too, and thank you, but if you're able to listen to kids too, kids learn how to take responsibility for their learning. And I got to tell you, like, we had a lot of fun in seventh period. The lesson went exactly as I expected it to. Great. Yay. But in eighth period, we had an immersive, candid discussion, not only about the act that we were studying, but then about Shakespeare and then the history of Shakespeare. And then we started talking about Titus Andronicus for some reason. And now we're talking about how executions were the main form of entertainment during the time and how Shakespeare also has written satire to some extent. And maybe we could look. And I had a kid who hated this unit at the beginning look at me and go, Mrs. Price, I'm going to tell Mr. Janitovich that you need to start a Shakespeare class. I'm like, and you're going to be in it? And he's like, we're going to watch Titus Andronicus. Yeah.
Wow. How many kids ever have asked for a Shakespeare class?
I'm like, if you will sign up, then yes,
Wow.
start a Shakespeare class.
I think that shows the importance of what you just said when you have kids that are asking for the atypical type of classroom, but you also have relevancy to Shakespeare, for God's sake. I mean, nobody finds Shakespeare relevant. You know,
No.
it's interesting that you were able to do that. That's great.
Well, and even so, I think we were just looking more so at like, how do we relate this to real life? We can do this with Romeo and Juliet, right? Like star-crossed lovers, teenagers. It should be relatable. Right now, they're looking at manipulation techniques. But they're having fun and they're seeing this and they're weighing in on things that I think they want to talk about, but we don't always give room to talk about. And sometimes like that's what the kids want. Maybe they don't want the showy, character interviews or publishing and all of that. I want that. And yes, they would want that too at some point, but sometimes they also want to sit and talk and they want to be heard and they want to make those connections and they want to help making those connections.
So part of what you said is that you were too immature when you first came out of high school to do the teaching piece. You thought this isn't for me yet.
Mhm.
In class, you cited classroom management as a big part of that, but now with the way you teach, how much does your approach in your curriculum really take care of your classroom management?
Um, it is a rare situation when management isn't there. Like when my kids aren't adhering to rules. Now, I'm not going to say that it's never happened. I got a class right now that's close to 30 kids. So I'm sure you can imagine how hard it is to continue to do certain activities when you've got a classroom. And when you're looking at like statistics like that, so teachers who are working in classrooms with 30 kids or more than 30 kids, and then you're looking at how do we keep kids engaged? And then you've got Schlechte who's going to suggest that, 60% of kids being engaged is really where you want to be. And that's a good day. Okay, well, 60% of 30, what's 40% of 30 at that point, right? That's a lot of kids not engaged.
Right.
And that you're just upping the stakes. And so, yes, for me, I am blessed to be in a situation where those 11th grade classes that I was just talking about, there's 10 kids in each one, right?
Oh,
And then
wow.
I've got my 10th grade classes, I've got 15 kids in one, 9 kids in another, 7 in an honors course, and then I've got 30. And it's hard. And so what's nice though is I love perspectives. So I'm seeing all of the different ways things work this year and all of the different ways things can fail.
I have found in past when I have small classes like that, sometimes it's almost harder to get people to participate because it is such a small group. And unless they are comfortable with each other, you're sitting in a class of 7 kids that just stare at each other. And it's hard sometimes. I think it's harder with the smaller groups than the big groups. Everybody's talking.
Mhm.
It's
Yes. Yeah.
and
Getting people to talk is not hard with a big group. But I think too, that's where like just listening to kids, knowing what they want to do in life And then thinking to yourself as a teacher, especially if you've had that outside experience like I have, like, okay, this is so like they're all so my seventh period, my eighth period classes are all CVCC students. They're all learning a vocational trade. One of the things that, they'll do when they come in is they immediately tell me how class went. And, I know who's in what particular um trade schools. Am I saying that right?
Yes.
It's third Monday. It's like I keep telling my kids, they're so confused. I'm like, it'll click eventually. Anyway, and then I look to see like how can I have a conversation or how can I relate what we're talking to what it is that you know, so I can get you involved in this conversation. And it's not easy, but what's nice is that they'll start talking to each other then. And they'll be like, oh, like the what was it yesterday? I had a couple kids who are in HVAC and they were talking with a few of my kids who are in healthcare. And oh no, it wasn't yesterday, it was today.
One of those days, Amanda, one of those days.
And anyway, and I'm always looking for ways like let it be a candid conversation. Let learning be candid sometimes. Let it just be like that's that inquiry, right? Like let
Hmm.
them lead you in the conversation and you just keep steering it back as it needs to go. But let them ask their questions. I don't know how we got to it, but like something happened with the electrical. The kid that wanted to touch it, I'm like, don't touch it. You will get electrocuted. They're like, well, we have the health people here, and I was like, that doesn't make me feel better.
No, no.
And I had another kid shout from across the room, don't Ophelia yourself. And I'm like, she didn't electrocute herself.
Oh my gosh.
No, all of a sudden, but it was interesting because like that kid brought us back onto our conversation. And now we're talking about we haven't gotten there yet. And now I got kids that are mad. I'm
Right.
like, wait, what happened to Ophelia? I'm like, you're confusing everyone. But everyone stopped. And it was the perfect segue. It was just that it was the right distraction that they needed because I looked over at the kid who shouted. I'm like, she didn't electrocute herself. What does Ophelia do? He goes, that's right, she drowns herself. And the other kids are like, but we didn't read that yet. I'm like, oh, and we're reading it today.
Whoops.
And now they're intrigued. And now we're there. And you want to talk about a gateway lesson. I'm playing off of everything they're talking about. I'm just immersed in their world. And I feel like, I don't know, I can keep talking about that. Some teachers like that, some teachers don't. I told you earlier, I'm an introvert. I am very tired by the time I go home.
Anybody watching this video right now will not believe by any stretch of the imagination you're an introvert. But if that's what you say you are, okay, we'll go with it. We'll say,
100%. 100%. I will happily cancel plans, go read a book. No one talk to me.
well, I think that's
Love
pretty much
this.
anybody that's an adult at this point. Just give me some time alone and I'll be happy. Um,
Mhm.
so looking back at your journey as an educator, um, how have you changed from your first year till now? What would you say to your first year self, knowing what you know now?
Um, don't sweat the little things. And it's- you're focused on the wrong stuff. I was always focused on the wrong stuff.
Hmm.
I was so focused on classroom management. I was so focused on um rigid routine, rigid structure that I never stopped to question like why is that the routine that another teacher is using? Why is that the structure that another teacher is using? Um I was just focused on the wrong thing. And at some point in my journey, it had clicked that I should have been focused on the curriculum. And then I should have been focused on the delivery of my curriculum. And then lo and behold, you're going to see everything fall right into place. And I'm not going to need all of this rigid. Yeah, kids need structure. Kids need routine. 100%. We have it. You walk in, phones go up. They know this. But do I have a seating chart? No. When we are taking notes, Chromebooks are shut. But do I care if you, I don't know, want to talk out of turn? Do I make you raise your hand when we're having a conversation, even in a room full of 30? No, you can talk because you're learning to listen. I'm just removing different things that would be distracting, but I'm not going to turn it into this rule number one, rule number two, rule number three. Like we're not doing that. We're not doing that. We're teaching soft skills and your
I
engagement is how we're doing this.
I really do love that. That's what I was going with when I was talking about management. Your curriculum, because it's engaging and because of how you run what you do, management happens because of that. It's not all these rules in place and this expectation that you will listen to me kind of thing. It is a learning culture that kids enjoy being in, and they appreciate that, and they'll be a decent person in that setting. And that's all you're looking for.
I agree. And I will, but I'll also tell you too that that was the one thing that I felt that I was most, I don't know, lacking as a first year teacher. You know, we go into college and we will learn some fun lesson strategies. We learn the importance of standards. And I can't even remember what else we looked at. We looked at psychology, of course, the psychology of learners, but nobody teaches you when you're coming out of college how to see the whole big picture and how to see how the mechanisms, you know, the cogs of your district all kind of click together and rotate together. And then when there's like, when a piece is broken here, how it's going to affect everything over here. Everything from like different buildings working together all the way down to, you know, how your one classroom is operating, right? Because if you've got something broken in your curriculum, well, you're going to get some classroom management problems. I feel like that's, if I could go back and I could tell my instructors in college, like if there's something I want to focus on, can you teach me how to build an effective curriculum? How do I look at the standards? How do I do, like we talk about backwards design, but how do I do backwards design so that I can have the whole framework done so that I can then look at and spend time on the delivery. You know what I mean?
I do. Actually, in one of my other interviews that I've done, it was with Karen Hess from Hess's Cognitive Matrix, and she told me about this group of two researchers that are starting to streamline curriculum in a method they call storyboarding curriculum, which you'll love when I tell you about it because you have to picture your curriculum as a narrative, and your students are the protagonist in the story. What's
Oh,
the story that you're telling during the year in that class? And you storyboard it out so they can see each aspect of that learning that they're going to take place through the entire year. I love it. I absolutely love it.
you know what I love about that too is that that tells you that I can tell you right now that curriculum has to be driven by the kids then. Because as an English teacher, that's one of the things we teach, the character drives the plot. So
Exactly.
if you're going to create a story, then your kids have to be the one driving it.
I knew you would love it.
Yeah, there it is. So
Uh,
Karen, got to talk to her, figure out who these people are.
well, it's actually right here. I'm still reading the book as we speak, as you can tell. So it's a streamlining the curriculum, and it's by Heidi Hayes Jacobs and Allison Zamunda.
Okay.
Zamunda.
You'll have to email me. Oh, perfect. Okay. Eddie Hayes Jacobs. Okay.
I will email
That'll be
you,
my
and
next read over break.
it's easy, and I'm actually redoing my college courses that way so I can see it visually.
Hmm.
And what I love about it, it communicates your message so easily on what you're going to teach, and has the product that the kids will be working through the entire year, that you can communicate to parents and non-educators and anybody. Here's what we do. Yeah. So
Yeah,
after we're done talking, we'll talk just a little bit more so I can share that with you because it's
absolutely.
pretty amazing.
And it's funny that you say that because I actually had a friend who'd called me who's interviewing for an adjunct professor's position somewhere in Virginia, and he's never taught before in his life. And he's like, "Can you just give me an idea?" And I told him, I said, "You got to start with your framework. You
Mhm.
have to 100% start there and then work in, and then you're going to be fine." So I'm so glad. I'm so glad that becoming normal
It
because that
is.
was not taught in college. They went
Well,
the other way. They showed delivery first, and then they're like, okay, but you'll figure out the big picture. Because I think people expect districts to have maps. Well, here's what I'll say to that. Like, okay, if a district has a map, great. That map still needs to change though and update.
and we've all done those maps, and that's why I was so happy to see this method, because the maps are, and I'm doing it right now with two districts. It's tedious, it's hard, it's time consuming. And when it's done, it's already outdated because hopefully your teachers are still modifying their plans and still working with their kids, just like you did. You changed from 1 hour to the next on your approach because the map was still the same, but how you approach it was totally different. So
Right,
when you start looking at the bigger picture of what this curriculum is, those tedious things, most people don't even look at them after they're done. They're just
right.
there in case. So I do think having something more visual and more of a story is going to go much further and much better for everybody involved.
Hmm.
So
Absolutely.
my shout out to those three people that I just mentioned because it is going to be important, I think, down the road. So wow, did we get sidetracked there? That was good though. It was good.
Easy.
That's what teaching is.
Yes.
There's a learning moment. Let's take advantage of it. Um, so one of the other things that I wanted to point out in your teaching, and you've alluded to it to several times already, you talk about the importance of the curriculum, but also the importance of the relationships with your kids. You know your
Oh,
kids.
100%.
So I would think, even though you're saying curriculum, you have to know your kids first before you can really dive into your curriculum because of meeting them where they're at and driving them to grow in your classroom, correct?
Correct. Yeah. Well, and it's also what allows you to keep the same framework for a curriculum and know when to make your changes. And it shouldn't feel that tedious to make a change. So, for example, like I taught a short story last year with last year's sophomores, and this year I'm in the same unit, same standards, same assessments. I changed that short story to something else. I didn't have to change anything else though, because I just knew that it wasn't going to land the right way with the same group. So, I mean, yeah, you have to know your kids. You want to talk about classroom management, I would have struggled with that story this year. So yeah, everything starts, I think. That's what makes a teacher good.
Totally agree. I think that when we look at framework, you've also identified why it's important to have that framework in place. Because if you have the framework in place, the variables are the kids coming in that you can adjust to. But if you have the variables of the kids and the variable because you don't have your curriculum mapped out, now you have two variables you're trying to piece together and it just doesn't work.
Well, what was the saying they used during COVID? We're building the plane as we fly it.
Yeah,
That's what it
yeah,
feels like. Yeah,
yeah.
it's a
That,
mess.
it is. And that's why I think you have to have that baseline of curriculum of where am I going? Now, how can I fit this group of kids into that framework and make it effective?
Hmm. And two, if you can understand your kids, if you know what they like, it's like you said, I was able to pivot my lessons. Did it take me anything to do? No. Nope, just sat and I listened to them. We also had the relationship there and the safety to have that conversation. I mean, I think there's times when like I know there's been times when I've just assumed that like the kids love what we're doing. And then I hear next year, oh, I hated that. What? You
Yeah.
loved it. No, no, we did not like that. I'm like,
No,
why didn't
you
you
loved
tell
it,
me?
Mrs. Price.
Yeah,
No.
I loved it. Like, well, why didn't you tell me? And they're like, yeah, well, we were afraid to tell you. But that broke my heart. It's like, no, you should never, ever be afraid to tell me. I had a kid today who didn't do his homework, and I saw him whisper that to the kid next to him. And I'm like, I looked at him and I kind of teased him. I'm like, secrets are no fun, you know? And he goes, it's like, I was just telling him that I forgot to do something really important. And I'm like, was it my homework? And he's like, I'm like, let me tell you something right now. And this is where I bring back like that real life discussion with these kids. I'm like, I have so much more respect for the kid that's up and upfront and honest with
Mhm.
me than the kid that's going to try to hide it. I
Right.
said, because that's going to force us to have a conversation and I'm going to figure out. I said, and when actually this is what I did. I said, let's do a scenario, teachable moment, right? I said, play along with me here. I promise you're not in trouble and I'm not mad. I said, tell me that you forgot to do the homework or that you didn't do the homework. It was okay. Mrs. Price, I didn't do the homework. I'm like, this is what I'm going to ask you next. Why didn't you do the homework? I said, but I want you to be honest with me now. Don't give me something that you think is going to get you out of trouble. Again, you're not in trouble. This is a safe place. He goes, well, I did one of the themes and then I tried to find it and it was really hard. So then when I got home, I knew I should have done the other three, but I just didn't want to. I'm like, so what I heard, Anderson, was that this was too hard. And without somebody there to assist you, you couldn't hold yourself to that accountability to follow through. I'm like, that tells me that we need to do a hard stop right now because now I'm going to wonder how many kids felt the same thing.
That's
And
great.
we changed our plans completely again.
Right.
And my kids were like, oh, I did the homework. Oh, yeah, no, it was really hard. And I'm like, well, now I don't, I said, please take this, with all of the love in the world. I'm so glad that you did it, but I don't trust it. I'm like, let's just stop for a second and let's practice one more time. And we ended up changing it up. And we instead of using the dystopian, short story, we used Buddy the Elf. Made it more relatable. But then what I did is I told him when we were done talking, I said, I'm so glad you told me this. I said, because this is where it's so pivotal. You can't if you don't know how to ask for help, you'll never know how to succeed. And
Right.
if you don't tell me, then I'm not going to know how to fix it. I said,
Right.
and that's a huge line of communication. And I literally did tell them this. I said, and when you get into your guys' positions and your real jobs, communication is key to everything. If you're not talking to the other people, you're not going to know when something breaks. You don't want
Right.
to find out at the last minute.
Well, and that's one of the big issues we heard from the employers that we talked to about kids just ghosting them and just not showing up, or people, not showing up for interviews or getting hired and not showing up for the first day of work, rather than communicating the reasons why. And it could be very legitimate, but that's pretty common now that, well, it's easier not to say anything in their minds than to have that confrontational potential with my employer, which is not good. Not good
No,
at all.
it's not. And one other thing that I'm learning this year with some of my students is that, it might also be this fear of failing and then getting in trouble. And then, you don't want to have to deal with the hard feelings. You don't know how to deal with those hard feelings. And, I was talking to some of my colleagues, and we have these issues where, how do I put this? Like, we have kids who I guess are struggling to admit when they've done something wrong, and they're struggling to have that very real and honest conversation. And instead, what we're seeing is the ghosting. They won't talk to us. They'll fix it, but they won't recognize that it ever happened. And we find that a couple months go by and they're repeating the same mistakes again.
Mhm.
And what makes me wonder is, why is it that our kids don't feel safe to fail with us? When you fail in school, this is a safety net. We will catch you. You're not getting fired. You don't have bills to pay. Your grades do not pay your bills. And even if they do, I mean, there are always ways. We have so much autonomy with things that, we can assist as needed. Like, for example, if my kid needs to retake a quiz, you retake the quiz. All right. We
Right.
can change the grade to the one that you've earned the second time around. We can fix things. This is a safety net. But if you fail in the real world, I can't promise someone's there to catch you. So why don't our kids feel safe? I don't know, failing. And why, and are we doing the, like, this was the other thing we talked about, are we doing them a disservice by letting them go out into the real world thinking that it's okay to not have that conversation? Do you know what I'm saying here? I guess
I
maybe I might be getting really tired now, but
No, no, no. It's totally spot on. The idea of allowing them to retake a quiz, and that's something that I've had high school staffs argue with me about. Like, we're trying to hold them accountable. If they didn't study the first time, why should we give them the second chance or this and that?
draw the
But
line somewhere for sure. Moderation. You can't have two extremes.
in the real world, when it comes to testing, you get second chances at driver's licenses, you get second chances at teaching licenses, and they don't take an average of your test. They take your best score. Same thing with ACT and SAT. They give super scores even.
Right.
So that testing piece is irrelevant to me, but the lesson that goes with that, okay, you have something that you didn't like. What have you done differently to prepare for that second thing or to fix that mistake? That's the part that I think we have to do a better job of teaching is
Yes.
once we make the mistake, whatever that is, what do we have to do to make the improvement so it doesn't happen again? That's
Right.
really what we lack in holding kids accountable to that next level.
Right. And that's where I think I wanted to go with this when I started to lose my train of thought, when I was thinking, like,
You're
we
tired.
do.
It's okay.
Yeah, it's a long day. We have two different extremes. We got the teachers that don't want to give up on that little bit. Like, that's the classroom management strategy. Okay. And then you'll get teachers, and I've made this mistake before, where, like, I will constantly allow you to do a redo. I will constantly allow you to turn it in late. I will constantly allow, but then, like, I actually had to take a step back and have a conversation with my students. This was like a year ago. And I was like, if this were the real world and I were doing this in my job, and they all know that I've worked in restaurants before. Um, and I was coming in late every day, even if I did have a reason, but if it was every day, or if I was um not turning in my paperwork on time every time, if I was disruptive, if I didn't, and I had to take tests as a bartender, like I had to make sure that I was passing certain exams, for OSHA and whatnot. Like if I failed that every time, my employer would let me go.
Hmm.
So, and I remember looking at my kids, this was last year, and I said, so how many times am I allowed to allow you a redo before I'm allowed to say no? And I made them think about that.
Right.
Because I didn't actually know the answer. Yeah, I'm gonna
No,
put it
really,
in
I'm looking
the
for an
notes.
answer.
And they'd asked me, and I was like, it depends on the person, but just like it depends on the student sometimes. But yeah, like it's so I think, am I better at it? No, I have a bleeding heart. I'm aware of that. And I think a lot of teachers do have bleeding hearts. And I think that's why you see both extremes and never really in the middle, because being firm but fair is harder than
Right.
we give it credit for.
Well,
Um,
I will answer that question that you posed, like how many is too many? When the kids stop trying to learn, when
mhm.
they're just doing it to get the grade, that's when I say, you know what? What have you done better to prepare? That's if they haven't done anything, then that's the limit.
And how do
Because
you measure that?
you ask them, and hopefully that there's an honest conversation. Tell me what you've done since the last time to improve your standing for this mistake or this test or whatever it may be. Because,
Right.
with technology, this is something I've been working on with a couple schools. You can remake tests, infinitely with artificial intelligence. And if you just give your first test and you plug that in and say, hey, give me another comparable test to this on these
Mhm.
same topics, it will spit out another test for you. So as long as you check it and it meets your standards, you could have new tests for every retake that you want to give a kid.
No, and that's fair. I think like I work in the English department, so their argument is how many times do I have to read that essay? How many times do I have to read that extended response? But
Yes, I get
it's
that.
a good point. And actually, because of that, we don't get a lot of kids that'll ask us over and over again to retake because they don't want to write it again, right? You don't want to do this all over again. But we will get, like, for example, I had a student who I allowed to retake the test, and I knew full well that he had failed the the test simply because he wasn't paying attention. He was goofing off in class. And I told him, I said, if when he came back, I said, I told him, I said, I'm a little offended. I said, I allowed you this opportunity, knowing full well that that was why you'd missed it. I gave you a slate, or I gave you a pass here. And then you come back into my class today and you repeat the same behavior.
Hmm.
I said, and you've got a quiz tomorrow. I said, if you do not pass this quiz tomorrow, please do not ask me if you can retake it. I said, because that's not how retakes work. And I think it was the first time I'd said that. And I did not like saying it, but I felt justified in saying it. I was mad. I was mad.
Yeah. When a kid's not reaching potential or not even trying to, that's hard.
Well, and like I said, we're doing our kids a disservice when we're not doing these things, when we're not putting our foot down on certain things. This is the safe place to fail. This is the safety net where we're going to catch you. This is where I do want to turn your behavior around, because your employer isn't going to take the time to do that. They're just going to fire you. But you're
Right.
stuck with me. So we're going to fix
Yep.
it.
You're with me all year, so and probably next year and the year after. So
Yeah.
get used to it. That
Yeah.
does help when you have kids multiple years in a row.
Yeah, well, this is the first year I've looped with kids.
Oh,
Yeah, it used to be that I was only the 10th grade English teacher, and then, we had only a ninth grade English teacher, and then only an 11th, and so on and so forth. This year, I have two sections of 11 on top of my full 10. So it's been a little bit crazier, a little bit more work, but
but it's fun seeing those kids again.
I was just gonna say, I gotta say, like, if I was gonna loop with any kids, like, I love these ones. So this has been a
Yeah,
blast. Actually, I can't complain too loudly.
that's great. That's
Good
great.
end to the day.
So where do you see education in the future? What do you see as trends that are coming up? What do you see in what you're talking with your colleagues? Where is education going in your opinion? What's next?
Where do I think it's just gonna go, or where do I want it to go?
A little bit of both, honestly, because I think that you can sort of drive your classroom, but there's still going to be trends in education in what you are expecting in the next 5 to 10 years. It's a tough.
Well, I think with the new science of reading trend coming out, which I think is great. And I think with AI, and I think with the struggles to control, I guess, our classrooms. And I think science of reading is an example of districts trying to get more control. I think like we were talking about, like, do we ever ask why we have these routines and practices in place? I think what I'm seeing, I could be wrong, is that I think some districts are getting frustrated, especially after COVID, and they're trying to get back to a place that's comfortable, that's productive, that's pushing out successful students. Yet we're not doing it fast enough because we got kids who've got AI. We've got kids who are using tech that like we're not familiar with. And this is actually this is a legitimate problem. Like, it is a legitimate problem. You know, I've got students who, if I asked them to write an essay, they could write me an essay and it could go through an AI detector and it'll come out 0%. But if I ask them to identify a theme, they can't. And something's not adding up. And we're starting to slowly find the evidence of it. But it's taking us longer than it is for them to learn how to do it. And so I think what we're going to see now, I think when you ask where the trends are going, I think we're going to see, I don't know. I always feel like when things go wrong and we're not sure how to fix it, we always end up going back to the things that we know work. And I think you're going to start to see more traditional practices coming back. And I think you're going to see more um, just control, clamping down on things. I don't think that's necessarily bad, weirdly enough. Um, like I said, I don't think extremes are the answer. I think that moderation is the answer. You know, I've got kids who, like I said, they think it's fun to do like panel discussions and character interviews, but then they'll look at you and be like, "Can you lecture today?" Like, we want a lecture because they know that a lecture means we're gonna have a conversation, and they want to have a conversation, and that's how they learn best. Or that's more of a traditional practice. That's how my history teacher taught me when I was in high school. He stood at
Mhm.
the front of the room, and I'm sure he still does actually, and just lectures. But he was one of my favorite teachers. Because he was engaged, that was what was engaging for me. So I think you're gonna see coming, like, the trend's gonna be more of a traditional comfort. I think we're also going to see a push once we find our comfort zone. I think we're gonna be forced to find the push to go back into how do we blend this into real world, because we're gonna be forced to, because of
Mhm.
the, and that's what I want to actually see. But what I really want to see is a focus. What I would love to see is a focus on how do you blend both of these things successfully. And let's stop buying into programs, and let's stop buying into, like, let's think. Like, let's just everybody stop and think we're very smart.
Right.
Have a conversation about the whole thing without having to buy into an expert and then trust their word.
Let's not go too far on that because I'm not an expert, but I do
No,
see
no, no, no,
people.
no. No, but you're also not selling an entire program. You know what I mean?
No,
Like, you're selling your thoughts and your opinions and your facilitations and discussions and helping people see other things that maybe they're missing, right?
good cover. Thank you.
But I mean it like, but like I do, and I'm actually referencing, like, the science of reading thing. That's program, right? And just before it was science of reading, it was, what was it? It was the other extreme. It was my gosh, what was it called? I actually just missed it. Um, Something about, like, not reading with them. It replaced phonics. I can't remember. But it
Oh,
was,
I know what you're talking about, but yeah, you're right.
yeah, and it was the idea. It was almost like inquiry-based learning.
Hmm.
And I think it just gave inquiry-based learning a bad name to some extent, because it's like you're not stopping. But again, like, I don't know. I think, like, what I would really like to see is us all sit down and look at everything and have a conversation.
I've always said, and I usually lead with this, there's no one program that can suit everybody. So we have to take what we know and use it the best way possible for our kids. Our kids are unique, so we have to teach them uniquely each time. And that's something that I think does get lost. There are some programs that have, you know, they've had success here and there, but I can find where it didn't work. And then terms get overused. And so like differentiation has been overused and it's almost like a bad word now.
Mhm.
But if you're doing it correctly, you can see value in it. You can see
Absolutely.
those things. So I think that part of it is don't settle on a program, but also really learn the strategies and the ideas that are going to be impactful for your kid rather than just glossing over it by saying, "Oh, we did this, 10 years ago, so it's the same thing. It's not going to work, or it's not that great, or whatever."
Mhm. And I think too, like just to build on that, like I think we need to stop looking at the trends, like stop following a trend. Just stop with the trends. Like just we need to start becoming critical thinkers. You know, we tell our teenagers this all the time. Don't follow the stupid TikTok trends. But yeah, here we are as educators following trends.
That's
And
funny.
what it is, it's a lot of like do as I say, not as I do.
Well,
I think sometimes if we want to teach our kids critical thinking, which is this, like, let's bring your skills into our classroom, well, we need to emulate that. Like, just
right,
think critically about it. Yeah, some practices might need to come back, but you know what? Some practices also don't need to go away, and you don't want to
right,
buy a program. It's the danger of one story, right? TED Talk.
exactly. Well, and that's the reason why I use Hattie so much. When you look at his strategies that have effectiveness, you know, direct instruction's up there, group work is up there. And so there are some things that are traditional strategies that work very, very well. Discussion in a lot of places, that's, I want to say it's like a 0.75 for direct instruction. So
Mhm.
why wouldn't you do it? There's value
Exactly.
to it. So don't throw away everything just because it's old, because that would also involve me. I'm old, and they would throw me out too. So it's about learning what works for your kids and being thoughtful in your process.
Mhm.
That's really what it comes down to. And it sounds like you are. It sounds like you're doing a great job.
Well, I try. I think, and that's really all that I think anybody should ever do, you know, because I don't have my best days. I'm still a
Well,
human being, but I try. And if somebody thinks I'm doing a good job, that's great. But I think, you know, so long as you are trying, like legitimately trying, you're trying to make the repeat like the relationship with your friends. It's late. You're trying to make the relationship with your students. You know who they are, you know what they like, you give them the freedom to just have some say in their education, and you're willing to work with. That's what makes us experts. I'm not an expert in English. That's actually not what I think I'm an expert in. I think I'm an expert in listening to kids and then
I
taking that.
I love that. Well, I'm going to let you go to your family, get some dinner, relax, get refreshed for tomorrow, and
Yes,
then come
it's
back and
they
do it.
got two days before winter break. I'm so sorry.
No, it's all good. So thank you for a great conversation. It really was very relaxing, and I wish you the best of luck the rest of this year, since I probably won't see you again right away. And for those watching, please remember to subscribe to Educational Norm. If you have questions about what I do or what Amanda's doing, you can contact me at norm@normpotter.com or visit my website, structuredcreativityconsulting.com. And until next week, have a great week, and be kind, be professional, and find solutions. Thank you very much, Amanda.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Bye.